welcome to today's episode, another great discussion, topic, and program planned by Active Prospect to help the lead generation and performance marketing industry navigate the most recent FCC one-to-one consent rules, record-keeping requirements, and the related updates to the TCPA, or Telephone Consumer Protection Act. We hope today's discussion will help you translate these changes with more confidence and a focus on compliance. Today's topic, taking action, how TrustedForm Verify solves for one-to-one consent. First, some housekeeping notes. In our webinar platform, there is a chat icon and a questions icon. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the session. Please use the chat section for general comments and interactions with other participants. And please use the question section if there are items you would like us to answer. We will leave time at the end to review and respond to your questions. Also, look out for the poll section. We have a few insightful questions we want to ask you in the audience today. Be on the lookout for a brief survey at the end of this webinar, and we encourage you to share your feedback and include any topics you would like us to explore in the future. And a link to today's recording will be emailed out tomorrow morning for your reference and sharing with your colleagues. Hello, I'm Benjamin Farrar. I'm the Director of Privacy, Security, and Compliance at Active Prospect. And for the past 20 plus years, I've worked for companies in the performance marketing, market research, financial services, and healthcare space, mostly focused on data privacy, data regulation, compliance, internal auditing, and information security. In all these industries, a significant data regulation was passed, and I was on the team responsible for reviewing these new rules and working to see clarity and establishing a compliance program. And now for a brief background and introduction, I'd like to pass the mic to our first featured guest, Christopher Williams, the lead product manager for Active Prospect's TrustedForm. Christopher.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for everybody who's here today. I am Christopher Williams. I'm the product manager for TrustedForm. As Ben said, I have about 10 years in the MarTech field. I work with some big names like Google too, and now I'm super focused in on compliance and all the things going around with the new FCC regulations. So excited to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christopher. And now Steve Rafferty, CEO at Active Prospect. Steve.
Steve, I think you're muted.
And I am muted. That's who I am. Hey guys, I'm Steve Rafferty. I'm the founder and CEO of Active Prospect, and excited to be here with you guys today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Steve. It's an exciting day, and we have some really good content and some announcements for you all. So if you've been following our content over the last 9 months, you should be aware of the significant updates from the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, that they passed into the TCPA, or Telephone Consumer Protection Act, this year. For those of you in lead generation, such as buyers, sellers, website publishers, and the broader performance marketing industry, the center stage focus now in the remaining 4 months is the implementation of the new one-to-one consent requirements on your websites, landing pages, and into your CRM, or customer relationship management system. It is very important to have constructive discussions now with partners who are contracted to participate in your lead generation funnel. All participants by now should be aware that the new one-to-one consent requirements are going to be in force on January 27th, 2025. And remember the 30 and 60 and 90 days prior to build those into your lead funnels. If you're not aware of this, please visit Active Prospect for information, awareness, articles, and video content about these significant updates. And the important topic of a webinar today is taking action, how Active Prospect's new TrustedForm Verify feature helps solve for the unique challenges and signals needed for web form one-to-one consent capture and documentation. FCC has been clear in presenting its concerns over the last 2+ years related to the volume of robocalls and the potential distraction noise directed to consumers from non-consenting phone calls and text messages. And we recognize and agree with this growing area of concern. But what about the companies who genuinely are trying to follow the rules and updates and only perform complying outreach to prospects or customers who have provided their real valid consent to receive calls and text messages about their products or services? There's numerous data privacy laws and regulations connected to personal data collection and data use, but the TCPA's allowance for private right of action and easy class action lawsuits makes it uniquely complicated for compliance, even by companies trying to follow the letter or the spirit of the requirements. The proper implementation of these requirements can become an invisible electric third rail of legal risk for all companies performing responsible outbound calling or text messaging to consumers or prospects, even those that are in small, medium, and large businesses. And that's one of the reasons why Active Prospect was founded years ago. The unique challenge that calling and now texting to reach genuinely interested, self-identifying consumers who are saying, yes, please call me or text me. I am in need of your exact product or service. And there's no better person to speak to Active Prospect's history and its role in the marketplace today than Steve Rafferty, our CEO. Steve.
All right. Thank you, Ben. For those of you who've been tuning in to these FCC webinar series, Ben is probably a familiar face to you because he's been on pretty much all of them. So let's give Ben some little hand clapping emojis if we can. I don't know if you have any there. All right, there we go. That's what I'd like to see. Thank you, Ben. Ben's been awesome. And the focus of these series so far has really been on kind of educating all of you guys on the rules, you know, that these new rules are here and that sort of thing. But now we're really starting to shift our focus and talk about solutions, right? And that's what we're excited to talk to you about today. We're talking about how to actually be compliant with these new regulations. So I want to take you guys back a little bit and first give you a little perspective on Active Prospect. And as Ben mentioned, our mission is to make consent-based marketing the best channel for customer acquisition. And we define consent-based marketing as a practice of only contacting consumers who have given their prior express written consent to be contacted. We believe that most marketers don't really want to waste their time calling consumers that don't want to hear from them. And as consumers, we all hate getting unsolicited calls that we don't want. So when this is done properly, it's really a win-win for both the marketer and the consumer. And while this might sound kind of simple in theory, in practice, it gets a little more complicated. And one of the things that makes it more complicated is that there's a lot of different methods that websites use to capture consumer consent. And some of these methods have been under a lot of scrutiny over the last couple of years, right? And you've been hearing about this in these last webinars that you've been tuning into. And the FTC, for example, has been going after what they call consent farms, right? And then now the FCC, which is our focus of this webinar, they're trying to close what they call the lead generator loophole. They're both talking about basically the same thing. What they don't like is when websites include a link in their disclosure language that lists all the marketing partners that are allowed to contact this consumer. Because what happens a lot of times in that marketing partner list is you might have 10, 100, or sometimes even thousands of companies. So effectively, when that consumer fills out the form and gives their consent, they're giving consent to every single company in that marketing partner list. So they might be giving consent for 1,000 companies to contact them. So these federal regulators don't like that. They feel like it's a little bit misleading, and often it is. Sometimes it's not, but whatever the case, they're trying to make it more obvious to the consumer. And so they've enacted this new rule for one-to-one consent, where each advertiser has to get consent for their company name individually given by the consumer. And this new rule is what's going into effect in January. So our focus now is we just want to make sure everyone is prepared, and we want to make sure all of our customers are protected. So today we're going to be talking about how to make sure you can use TrustedForm to comply with these new regulations. And Christopher is going to go into more detail on that. But before he does, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an overview of TrustedForm too. TrustedForm is actually comprised of 4 different products. There's TrustedForm Certify, TrustedForm Retain, TrustedForm Verify, and TrustedForm Insights. 4 different things. And so I want to give you a high level overview of each of those different products. First, TrustedForm Certify is what's used to issue certificates. So if you're a publisher or website owner, you have a form on your site and you'd like to certify your leads with TrustedForm, you can implement our TrustedForm Certify SDK, and you can start issuing trusted form certs with your leads, and that's free, right? Just sign up for an account with us, get the SDK, implement it on your website. You can start issuing trusted form certs for free. But then the next product, if you want to keep those certificates, you need to use TrustedForm Retain. That is a paid product. When you use TrustedForm Retain, you're retaining those certificates in your account. We keep them there for you for 5 years, so you can get access to them whenever you need them, and you'll have access to the full session replay of what happened with the consumer, filled out that form, and you can see the disclosure language if present and whether or not they agreed to it. So that is important for record keeping. But then we have TrustedForm Verify. What is that? TrustedForm Verify is what you use if you want to check if you have valid consent programmatically before you call a consumer, right? This is what you use to make sure you have valid consent before you contact. TrustedForm Retains for record keeping, Verifies for real-time verification. And then last but not least, we have something called TrustedForm Insights, which is the metadata associated with the lead event. This is information like the originating domain, where the consumer signed up, the age of the lead, how much time they spent on the web page, that kind of thing. That is really used for optimization to make sure you're optimizing your campaign buy appropriately. We're not going to be talking about that today. We're really not going to be talking about TrustedForm Retain either. Today, we're really going to be focused on TrustedForm Certify, which is the changes that the publisher needs to make in order to comply with this new one-to-one regulation. There's going to be some changes in the implementation of that product on your website. And then also TrustedForm Verify, we're going to be talking about that because now in order to check that you have consent, you need to check that you have one-to-one for your specific brand name, your legal entity name. You need to check, make sure the consumer agreed to hear from you. So that's what we're gonna get into here in just a minute. And so before we do that, I do have a question for all of you. We'll do a little poll here. I want to know how many of you are checking for valid consent before you reach out to a consumer on their cell phone today. All right? How many of you are checking to make sure you have consent? If you're using regulated technology, contact a consumer on their cell phone. How many of you are checking to make sure you have that before you call, right? Or before you text? So we're going to put a little poll up. If you guys could respond to that, I'm curious how many are checking this, because if you're not checking in advance before you reach out, you are opening yourself up to a lot of legal liability, right? And it's also just not a good business practice, right? You want to make sure that you're only reaching out to consumers that want to hear from you. So I'm curious to hear where people are on that. So with that, now let's hear from Christopher Williams, your TrustedForm Product Manager, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about how you can check for consent in real time at TrustedForm Verify with this new one-to-one consent check, and talk to you about what the publishers are going to need to do on their websites to allow you to do that. So Christopher, I will pass it over to you.
Appreciate that, Steve. And I think first we're actually going to show everyone a brief video to make sure that they get what the TrustedForm Verify one-to-one consent check really is. That'll be a quick way for you to learn a little more. So I think we'll turn it over to
And that is just a quick teaser introductory video of Active Prospect's new TrustedForm Verify one-to-one consent check feature. And now to go into more detail behind the scenes of what's involved with all this, Christopher Williams.
All right, so I am super excited to be talking about this. We have put a lot of work into this. And in case you didn't get it, what we've just created is a way for you to easily programmatically check whether or not you have one-to-one consent. We make it super simple, but like Steve said earlier, figuring or saying that you have consent may be simple, but figuring it out is actually a very complex matter. And that's exactly why we made this feature. When the FCC announced their new regulations, we talked to tons of publishers and buyers to figure out what it is that they would need in order to be able to comply with the new rules. And essentially everybody just said, just help me because I don't know what to do. At first, we started looking at forms that people had, and I guarantee you not a single one of them would comply with the new regulations. So from there, we saw that we really had to first standardize what it was that people were going to actually do in order to get one-to-one consent. So we created this new feature, which really focuses on two ways that you can get one-to-one consent. The first one is going to sound kind of familiar to you when you only have literally one name listed there. It's in the consent language, and that's it. But then what we've also heard from a lot of publishers that we talk to is that they want to still be able to shop leads around to more than just one person. So then that's where they're planning to actually show a list of checkboxes. And those were both actual examples that the FCC gave as they published these new rulings. So creating creating those two methods that are standardized is the first reason why we made our new solution here. The second is because you need a way to actually be able to check this in a scalable manner. You don't want to have to look through session replays for every single lead that you purchase. So you need a programmatic way so that you can do this for thousands or 10,000s of leads. All right, so hopefully that all makes sense. Now we're going to jump a little more into how this actually works and what is supported here. So there are, like I stated, a couple of ways that you can actually get one-to-one consent. But first, let's look at the way that it actually flows through the TrustedForm ecosystem. Steve mentioned earlier how we're going to talk about certify and verify mainly. So all of this starts with certify. So with TrustedForm Certify, that's actually a JavaScript snippet that lives on publishers' forms and is monitoring what exactly is happening there. Now, publishers, historically, all they had to do was add that JavaScript snippet. We're going to be asking them to do a little bit more to give us more information, and I'll get more into that in a second. But once they install Certify appropriately, a TrustedForm certificate is created, and the URL that points to that certificate is sent to your lead buying system. Now, hopefully you're using Lead Conduit, which is the active prospect lead buying system, which is tightly integrated with TrustedForm and makes everything super easy. But whatever system it is that you're using, we're able to work with that as long as your system is willing to work with us. So we need to make sure that your system makes a call to the TrustedForm Verify product. And as part of that call, you need to pass in the name that you want to actually check to make sure the consumer gave consent to. So this is going to be your legal entity name. And when you pass that, that essentially tells Verify that you want to know, was one-to-one consent given? And we make it super easy for you. We just tell you, yes, it was, or no, it wasn't. So you don't have to do any, kind of checks with a score or anything like that. We give you a clear answer. And from that, your lead buying system can use that data and decide what you want to do next. Maybe you want to reject the lead outright, or maybe you want to just flag that lead in your CRM system and have that data circulate through. Whatever you decide there is, of course, okay. But of course, we advocate that consent-based marketing is the best way to go. And in that case, whatever you do, you should only reach out to those who have actually given you adequate consent, which now, thanks to the FCC's ruling, means that it has to be one-to-one.
Right. And Christopher, so that it's gathering some signals about consent being captured in a one-to-one consent manner, right?
Exactly. So let's look at some examples of forms so you can actually see what signals we're looking for. So in this example, which is the most simple of them all, as I stated, is when there's one advertiser that is just listed in the consent language. So here, what we're able to do is actually look in the actual consent language and see what advertisers are listed there. And as long as it's only one, then we can tell you that, yes, that advertiser has one-to-one consent to contact this consumer. If there are multiple there, or if there's one advertiser listed and then there's a list of marketing partners, all those are cases where you don't have one-to-one consent, and we would tell you exactly that. So let's look at the next one that we've heard a lot of publishers are actually planning to use. And this is the example I stated before, where there's just a list of advertisers and checkboxes next to each one. In this case, what you really want to know is that the checkbox that is next to your company's name was actually checked. Because of course, if your company was just listed, but the consumer didn't select you, then that does not help you at all. So in these cases, what we're looking for just simply is that that checkbox was checked next to the name that you passed us. In this case, we don't necessarily discriminate based on how the checkbox was checked. So if it was checked, if it was pre-checked before the form loaded, that's okay. You still have one-to-one consent there. If it was selected using a select all, that's also okay too. The important thing is just when the form was submitted, was your name actually checked? Did the consumer select it and choose you to hear from?
Yeah, so Christopher, it sounds like you're trying to build in some flexibility in there for the different sort of web form solutions that exist for providing it.
Exactly. TrustedForm is kind of planned to be as flexible as possible to meet all of the different ways that people tend to go about this. We just want to make sure that you have the data necessary to make your own decisions about your compliance practices. And of course, I don't think anyone said it yet, we're not offering any form of legal advice whatsoever. You should always consult with your teams to get specific advice for your company as to how to proceed here. Yeah. All right. And then there's one more example that I'm going to go over. Now, this one is very similar to the checkbox example, but there are a couple of slight things that are different. Here in this example, you can see that the advertiser's name or the company name isn't actually shown, but instead there's a logo there. And also, that's not a traditional checkbox. It's actually a tile, which you can select that entire tile in order to select the company that you want to hear from. And I wanted to point this out because this is also okay too. Of course, once again, we're going to be asking the publishers to give us some information so that we can determine one-to-one consent appropriately, but this structure works just fine. And it's actually just like the checkbox example. So those are all the things that out the box, we will absolutely support. These are all ways that you can get one-to-one consent. And of course, as we hear more about how the law evolves and once there's case law and things like that, if there are changes that are necessary to be made, we will be on top of that for sure and make them.
Yeah, that's great. And that's what we've been hearing in the marketplace and in the discussions. There's different ways in which the web form can be presented. Some brands want to do it certain ways. Some brands have done it consistently. And we needed to build something that was flexible to allow to accommodate, but still attempt to gather the signals that help identify whether consent was captured in a one-to-one consent manner. So excellent.
Absolutely. And the key to this flexibility are vendors. So vendors, for anyone out there, we need you to take action so that everyone can use this new feature. You're going to actually have to make some changes to the current way that you use the TrustedForm Certify product. So like I said, historically, you've just simply put our JavaScript snippet on your form and then you were done. Super easy, super quick. There's a little more to do now. Essentially, what we need from you now is to also add tags to the key elements in your form that are used to obtain one-to-one consent. And when I say this, I just mean you're going to need to label things like where the advertiser names are present, where the submit button is, where the consent language is. By telling us these things, we get all of the data that we need to then make some of those simple logic decisions that I talked about before. Once we know this, we can do things like count the number of names that are present in the consent language or make sure that your checkbox was actually checked. So we're going to be going more into this in future webinars for sure so that we can show you step-by-step what it is that you need to do. But I assure you, it's a really easy process. It doesn't add too much more to what you have to do. And you are probably all already changing your forms in general to meet the new FCC requirements.
Yeah, excellent. And we're going to be sending out what we're calling an attendance kit to all of you who have attended today. It's also going to be on our website. So we're providing instructions and communication for how to have these discussions and how to do the outreach and the components that are needed for the tagging on the web forms to be implemented to receive the signals for one-to-one consent.
All right. So now let's talk about what the advertisers or the lead buyers have to actually do as well in order to use this feature. So as we alluded to, this is a programmatic feature with which you can use to tell whether or not you have one-to-one consent. So when we say programmatic, we mean that you can use it via our TrustedForm certificate API. APIs are the ways that different systems or computers talk to each other. So you just need to set up your system to talk to ours in order to get this data. Setting that up is, once again, really simple, especially if you already use our Verify product, then it's only going to be one small change. And that one small change is making sure that you send us your company's legal name that you want us to use during this verification process. Once again, if you want to know that you have one-to-one consent, you have to make sure that the appropriate name is listed there. So we're counting on you to tell us what that is, and then we'll do all of the hard work for you after that. You should also make sure that all of your vendors know what the appropriate name is so that they are in fact using that and not something else. And then once you integrate with the API, you just simply need to send those results to your CRM or whatever system it is that you are using to make decisions about how you want to proceed with that lead. All right, so hopefully that gives you a good overview of how things work, and hopefully you're pumped and ready to use it. I think now we're going to move on to the portion that everyone is probably really excited to hear about, and that is more so what you get out of this, first of all. And I kind of talked about it as I was going through how you actually use this, but for lead vendors, number one, what you're doing is improving the value of your leads. Once you send a lead that someone can actually verify it has one-to-one consent, it becomes so much more valuable because they can trust that. And that trust is going to be something that shows in your partnership and helps you to then get more partnerships and create stronger partnerships as well. Now, for the advertisers, what you're getting obviously is compliance. And I know that for some people, that's not the most exciting thing, but I guarantee you it is worth it. Number one, you're going to be mitigating tons of risk. You don't want to get fined, especially you don't want to get caught up in a class action lawsuit because that could end your business right there. So absolutely, that should be something to motivate you. But there are some more things too that are going to be huge positives. Like you're going to be protecting your brand reputation. Consumers are tired of hearing from people that they didn't want to hear from. They're tired of the spam calls and all of that. By making sure that that your consumers have actually given you one-to-one consent, the chances that they actually know you're going to call them and want to hear from you skyrocket. So there'll be much more higher intent leads. And what comes with high intent leads? Better conversion rates and overall nicer experiences for you. So hopefully that'll lead to higher KPIs across your entire company and business. And just lastly, I want to note that if you try to do this any other way, you're going to spend a lot of time manually reviewing everything to make sure that it is compliant. So save yourself some time, some headaches, and use the TrustedForm Verify one-to-one consent check.
Yeah, excellent. I know of course, was building it to scale, which was key of what you all were trying to do and provide in this and capturing the new world of capturing one-to-one consent pieces. Excellent. So if you'd like to get a demo, there's a poll right there. You can just answer yes or no. That's a quick way to provide your information there. You can also visit our website, which will have much more information as well. But answer that poll if you would like to learn more. And as Christopher said, we are going to have a few sessions in the near future, digging into more of the details. I think now would be good. There's probably some key questions, which happens with a new product launch or feature. So we anticipate some of these. So before we open up to your questions, so go ahead and provide those in the question section, the questions that you have. But some of the key questions that we wanted to make clear here is one, can TrustedForm Verify one-to-one consent check if a company name was included in the consent language section? Christopher?
Yeah, so that was one of the cases I went over. In fact, just making sure it's in the consent language is the most simple case. So we can absolutely do that, but we can also tell you if there was a checkbox or way to opt in to hearing from your company and tell you whether or not that was actually selected as well.
Okay, excellent. So can TrustedForm verify one-to-one consent check if multiple companies were presented and selected for one-to-one consent outreach?
Sorry, I jumped the gun there. But yes, it can do that as well. That is exactly the scenario where you have the check boxes and someone selects your company.
And one note on that, Ben, if I may interrupt, for the publishers out there or the lead generators, if you're doing something different than what Christopher showed you, he gave you the 3 examples that we think are more the typical setup that we're seeing. If you're doing something different, we need to know about it. So please reach out to us. Make sure that we can, TrustedForm will support the approach that you are taking. Because again, our focus here is to make sure everyone's protected, and we're all ready for this new rule in January, so that we're starting to run out of time. So don't be shy about sharing what you're trying to do.
All right, I think it's my turn to ask a question now. So, hey Ben, will the one-on-one consent check allow for select all buttons and pre-selected checkboxes?
Yeah, good question. Yes, we have heard industry legal peers comment that select all or pre-check boxes on web forms would likely be acceptable for use as long as it's reasonably clear that the consumer has the ability to make an individual selection. But again, please seek legal advice on your specific uses of select all or any pre-checked web form elements. But yes, the product does support it. And next, can the one-to-one consent check be used on all web form leads?
That's a great question. And the answer is that it depends on your actual vendors, whoever actually generated that lead, whether or not they've made the necessary changes. So I talked a little bit earlier about how they're going to have to add tags or labels to the key elements that we need to determine whether or not consent was given properly. So as long as they've done that, then we'll be able to actually allow you to use the one-to-one consent check for that lead.
Okay. Does it work on the ping or the post?
Oh, so this is a very popular question, and this one may require us to spend a little more time here. But let me first say that this will work as long as the TrustedForm certificate has had a chance to record the consent being given on the web form. So I know that's not exactly a straightforward answer, but I say that because historically, when someone was pinged with a lead, generally the lead, flow had already gone all the way through. They already got all the consents that they wanted to, and then they would ping out the lead. We expect after these changes that most of the pings will actually happen before consent has actually been given, because the vendor would want to determine who actually wants this leads, and maybe, the ones who they select will be the ones who they actually show and give the consumer an opportunity to give their consent for. So if that's the case you're in, then on the ping, the consumer wouldn't have actually given any consent yet. So if you try to use the one-on-one consent check, it's just going to tell you, no, you don't have one-on-one consent, because of course it hasn't been given yet.
Okay, excellent. And how does it respond with one-to-one consent results? Is there some sort of alert or message, or how does it communicate?
All right, so we use an API in order to return these results to you. And like I said, the API, that really just means one computer is talking to another. So if you want to establish any kind of alerts or messaging, that's something that you would want to talk to your tech team so that they can use the response from the TrustedForm Verify API in order to set up those alerts for you.
Okay, so that'll be the initial communication path, but you can set other alerts depending on your business, how it needs to go from that point off after it receives the API communication. Okay, great.
Right, and then one more thing that I have to throw in there is that if you use Lead Conduit, there definitely are ways to set up those alerts yourself and do it really easily.
Yeah, and we're talking about tags. So how many tags are going to be needed on the web form for a Verify one-to-one consent check?
All right. This question must have come from someone who's worried about it and thinks that it's going to be a lot of work. I guarantee you adding each tag is super fast, so it won't be a lot of work either way. but there are only 4 tags that are absolutely required in order to make this work. But that will vary based on how you've actually set up your form. So the 4 tags, that's for the really simple use case where there's one advertiser name listed in the consent language. If you're, listing a bunch of advertiser names with the check boxes, obviously that becomes more complicated. You have to add a tag for each advertiser name, so that number could go up. But nonetheless, as quickly as you can copy and paste is essentially how quickly you can add these tags. So I don't foresee that being a problem.
Okay, so at least 4, but there are other tag elements that can be applied to the web form to give you even more signals about the degree of one-to-one consent. Okay,
absolutely.
What about some publishers' pages who might lack technical knowledge or coding, or when we're talking about tagging, what would be your advice there about complexity?
All right. So yeah, this is always hard too, because the marketing world requires you to work with websites, and websites generally require some technical knowledge, even if it is slight. I will say once again that this process is pretty simple as long as you understand what HTML is and have a general idea of how to modify it. You can probably just look at the examples that we've provided in our instructions and honestly just copy and paste a lot of it and get things working. The other thing that I'm happy to say is that Active Prospect has a wonderful support team. So if you have problems, definitely reach out to them and we'll be able to help you there. If you're using a specific landing page or form site, we will be trying to create specific guides for those. Just let us know what it is that you're using. And, of course, if you have any troubles there, and we'll do what we can to make sure that we have dedicated resources to help you out.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll be providing instructions to help in that conversation and for reference, as always, in our products. So the question, do I need an Active Prospect account? Steve?
Yes. Short answer. So if you're a publisher, lead generator, and you are using TrustedForm Verify, then you need to have an account, and through your account, you can get the instructions that you need. Now, this is free to use Certify, just to reiterate that. And then if you want to use TrustedForm Verify, that is it'll be a paid product. So again, something you need to have an account for.
Okay. Do I need a new contract for this service feature?
Well, so you only need a contract, or the paid product is just a TrustedForm Verify. You can use that as a self-service customer and sign up online and use it. No contract required. If you're an existing customer of ours, existing contracted customer, you'll likely have to update your agreement.
All right. I have a question. Does using the one-to-one consent check satisfy all the FCC's consent requirements? Ben?
Okay, yeah, good question. So no, complying with all the requirements requires a broad strategy that should be discussed with your compliance and legal teams. However, the one-to-one consent check is essential to help comply with the most noteworthy parts of those pieces, but it is not implementation of the new Verify one-to-one consent check and then you are done. It's just helping provide those additional signals to give you more indication about how that consent was captured compliantly.
All right, another compliance-focused question. The video and slides showed example brand names and logos, but the TCPA update language says entity. Can we use our brand logo?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And same thing, similar. Seek legal counsel for your language that you're using in your notice. An opt-in was presented, or any company logos or anything related to the entity question. Make sure you consult with them. But we do know in the marketplace there was requests, or certain individuals were looking to use logos, but you need to get that entity question answered about what you're presenting out there, and use legal counsel for that. All right. So next, I'd like to open up our questions from our participants. And so that's going to be in the question section there.
There are a lot of questions there, just so you guys know. And so for the participants, we are going to have some more sessions. So if we don't get to your question today, we'll try and get to it at a later date. We're going to have some follow-up sessions. We're going to go into more detail for both the advertiser, what the advertiser needs to do, and what the publishers need to do as well.
Okay, so everyone take a look at the questions there and grab one that
the first one from that says, can you allow leads to be denied if they are not verified to have your company name? Yes, that is possible to do. So when you use TrustedForm Verify, if you're hitting the API directly, then we'll tell you if it meets the one-to-one consent. We'll tell you in real time if you've got it or not. And then it's up to you on how you want to act with that. If you're using Lead Conduit, make it pretty easy. So you can easily put in a rule where you can filter leads that don't meet your consent requirements, right? So we'll block those with Lead Conduit before they make it into your CRM. If you're not using Lead Conduit, it's up to whatever system it is you're using and how it's configured. So but if you're using Lead Conduit, we try and make that very easy to do.
Yeah, and there's one more thing I'll add there is make sure you talk to your vendors. Let them know I'm not accepting any leads unless they have verified one-to-one consent. Make sure that they are aware you're going to be using the TrustedForm one-to-one consent check. They need to make all the changes to their websites necessary for that, and that if they send you a lead where your name wasn't checked or it wasn't the only name presented in the consent language, you don't want that lead. And
yeah, actually, thank you, Christopher, for bringing that up. That is just a good general rule. If you're going to start rejecting leads from your partners, I think your vendors or your partners, that it requires a conversation, right? You need to let them know, like, these are the things that I accept, these are the things I don't accept, and you've got to get agreement with your partners on this stuff. You can't just start doing it. That wreaks havoc for everybody, right? So if you want to put in a rule where you're going to deny leads or reject leads that don't meet your consent requirements, you need to be very explicit with your partners about the fact that you're going to do that and when you're going to do that and what your needs are. So it's important to have that good conversation there.
Yeah, and let me also mention we've got an email template if you need to jumpstart that conversation or don't know where to start. We're going to cascade that in our materials there, so you can copy and paste that to start starting those conversations, which is critical at this point.
Right. And once again, I'm not a lawyer, but if it were me, I would definitely make sure to get it in writing and make sure that is part of your contract, just to facilitate that process and make sure everybody's on the same page.
Absolutely. Let's see. I'll find some other good ones in here.
All right. I see one at the top. Will this work if the one-to-one consent is completed within an iframe widget using a URL with a different domain on the site? So that is a great question, probably one that's a little technical. So sorry for anyone who doesn't know what an iframe is. Quickly, I can say an iframe is basically when you show a website inside of a different website. It's a commonly used technique because maybe your form is hosted on one website like Form Site or 123 Forms or something like that, but then you have your own personal website and you want to show the form from that other, website on your website. And I will say, yes, we are the one-to-one consent check will absolutely still support iframes. TrustedForm in general has always supported that and is aware. So we'll still be able to tell you whether or not you have obtain one-to-one consent, even if it was obtained inside of an iframe. So simple answer, but yes.
All right. There's a question that says, how long do TrustedForm certificates last without the retained product? What if someone verified the cert? Good question. So if you're not using TrustedForm Retain, if the TrustedForm certificate was associated with a submitted lead, meaning there's a submit event there, they last 90 days, right? And then after that, they're deleted. So someone needs to retain it if you want to keep it for longer. Now, just because someone verified it doesn't mean it gets retained. So they work independently. So you could choose just to verify that you have consent and not retain them if you so choose. I don't recommend that. I'd say if you want to verify that you've got the right consent, and then for record keeping purposes, you want to retain it in your account in case someone ever questions whether you did in fact have consent. So they do work independently.
Yeah.
Christopher, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say if you're asking this question, that worries me a little bit because it sounds like maybe you aren't retaining the certificate so that you have it for as long as you need. This is definitely something you don't want to play around with. Don't risk it. Just make sure that if you're contacting a lead, if you've reached out to them, you called them, that you have retained that certificate so that it will last for the entire statute of limitation for the TCPA and whatever regulation you need. And if you need to store a certificate for longer, we can definitely work that out with you. So make sure you're retaining all of those certificates. Okay, so I guess we're moving on to the next question, which I see at the top there. For a multi-advertiser form with multiple opt-ins, will one advertiser be able to see another advertiser's consent language, assuming the same lead was sent to multiple advertisers? This is a great question and definitely one that has come up as we've talked to lead generators for sure. The answer is going to be, it depends. So once again, a lot depends on how your lead generator actually sets up their form. So if they set up their form in such a way that all the advertisers are shown on the same page with checkboxes like we talked about, then yes, all of that is going to be captured on one certificate. They will all be shown in the same session replay. So whoever gets sent that session replay will be able to see everyone who was listed there. Now, if the lead generator structures their form in a different way, such as maybe they only show one offer at a time, then each offer actually looks more like that single advertiser example. Maybe they're only showing, one advertiser who wants to get consent, and then whether or not, the consumer agrees to that, then they switch to a different page and shows that advertiser's offer and gets a different consent. In that case, they actually have the option to generate separate certificates for each offer and could make it so that, each advertiser only sees what was applicable to them. This all really just depends on how it is that they structure their form and how they implement TrustedForm Verify. And we are more than happy to help all lead generators out there figure out what is best for them and their buyers, of course.
All right. Should move on to the next question. This top one has the most votes. It says, who pays for the verified product? The lead seller who is using Certify, or the lead buyer? So this is an interesting thing. I think a great question, something we should point out that the regulators are very specific about. They say that it is the advertiser, or the FCC refers to as a seller, so it's a little confusing, but the seller of the services, whoever's contacting that consumer to sell their goods and services, it is their responsibility to have consent documentation. And they specifically say you cannot rely on the lead generator to store your documentation. Like, you have to verify that you have consent yourself. It's your responsibility as a caller to verify that you have consent and keep a record of that consent for compliance. And so, yes, so that is on the buyer. So the way our products work is whoever's using it is the one who's paying for it. So whoever's using Verify, you don't have to be the end buyer. You could be a lead generator and you could use the Verify service, but really that it should be the end buyer or the advertiser or the brand that's using the service and paying for the service.
Yeah, and with the class action development and the increase in volume of all those, and I mean, after one-to-one consent, it's only a small amount to pay to potentially have some protection that you've documented consent after that. So it's a well worth investment versus otherwise settling TCPA or class action lawsuit or not being able to show that you have evidence of it.
Great point. All right. Next question I see is, what if we use multiple company names /DBAs? How will you indicate if consent was provided to the applicable DBA? This is a great question as well. And I think that in order to make this work the way that you want it to, judging by the way your question is written, what you're going to want to make sure is which name you expect it to be present for each lead. So when you're getting a lead from a certain vendor, you should know which name you told them you want it to be present. Even if you have multiple, you should tell them one, that you actually want to be shown to the consumers. And that's the one that you're going to want to check for and pass in the API request. So then, of course, we'll tell you whether or not that name actually received one-to-one consent.
So the name, but just to clarify there for folks, Christopher, the name, is that passed in the request? Can you change it up for one request, use one name, and then another request pass a different?
Absolutely. That's one of the really nice things about the flexibility of this. We're asking you, what name we should be looking for. So every time you make a verified request, you can specify this and you can tell us what to look for. You could even, if you wanted to, do something where maybe you check for one name, and then if that name wasn't there, then maybe you make another request to check for the next one. The flexibility here makes it so there's a lot of options, but I do think that the most efficient way to go about this, of course, is to know what name you expect and make sure that one is there.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Oh, let's see here. Read through.
Well, one that I see that I'm interested in hearing from Ben about, so sorry, Ben, if this puts you on the spot, but do I need to worry about one-to-one if I specifically generate inbound calls? That has been a hot topic for a lot of my discussions as well.
Yeah, so there can be some nuanced details with that, but inbound calls, if a consumer, their call to action, or they are calling you for information about your product or service, so they dialed you, then one-to-one consent would not be needed because they took the action to call you. A lot of these components are when companies need to do the outreach in the inverse, or the outbound. So calling or texting, you need to have consent because that's what the FCC was trying to address, the volume of unsolicited or unconsenting calls in which we're being barraged about. But if you have a simple model where you've got your phone number posted on a billboard and they're calling you for information about your product or service, you would not need to be in one-to-one consent. But seek legal counsel about your business model, because there could be some nuances that might not make it quite so simple, but hopefully that helps answer.
But one follow-up question on that, Ben, if they want to follow up with that consumer who they received an inbound call from, and they want to use regulated technology for that automated follow-up process, they're kind of stuck, right? You got to have the prior express written consent at that point for follow-up.
That is correct. Yeah, you would not want to initiate any outbound call if you didn't have documented consent or text messaging that you've captured that. So that is one. If someone's calling in and it suddenly drops, or there's a new reasons that can happen, would not advise calling them outbound using regulated technology. You could get yourself caught into a TCPA case for sure.
All right. More questions, or do we need to wrap? Let's see.
All right, one more question. See if you can grab one more simple question, and we'll.
Was there one that you had your eye on, Steve? I saw you looking through. I don't want to take
I'm blind. I can't. The text is so small. I can barely read them. That's so you can grab one.
All right, I'm going to pick this one here. What do you recommend for in-house quality control or verification if we've only gotten permission for the end user or seller to contact the person? All right, this is an interesting one because I think the way it's phrased leaves it a little bit ambiguous.
I'm not sure I understand it, unfortunately. That's the one I was looking at. In-house quality control. Oh, no, I can't see it at all. Did we have it printed?
Yeah, we're trying to address that. I mean, I've been advocating you need to have a program where you're taking a look at the consents that are being captured. I mean, that's a great quality control feature as well. You obviously need to do it programmatically, like Christopher was talking about, which is helping you enable that. But if you're never looking at the consents that are being captured, you don't have someone taking a look at that, spot checking, or even programmatically, you're definitely
and I'd say this is I think this is my interpretation of the question. Let's say they're first party leads. It's your own websites. Do you need to use Verify? Do you need to check that you have the right consent? If you've got a lot of websites, people screw up, mistakes happen. It's possible you got some forms out there that don't have the right consent language on it. So you can still use this internally to make sure and check every lead before you send them a text or whatever, the outbound call. You can still use this to make sure that the right consent was captured on your own websites. Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So we're in the final few minutes. Now it's time for our calls to action. So Steve, what are you addressing everyone out there to do? They're listening, they're interested in the product and what we're talking about. What are the next steps?
Yeah, so I guess I have different call to action for the different groups. If you are a lead generator, publisher, you own the website, you have the form, you've got to take action. You've got to add these tags that Christopher was talking about and start doing that now. And we're happy to help with that, but get into your active prospect account, and the instructions are with the TrustedForm Verify product. So that's where you'll get all the tag instructions for how to implement this for your clients, for your buyers, so you can help make sure they stay safe. And then for the advertisers out there, one thing, there's a misconception out there about TrustedForm. A lot of people say, oh, well, I've got TrustedForm cert. I'm good. I'm safe, right? And it's more than that. Just because there's a TrustedForm certificate doesn't make it compliant. TrustedForm documents what happened, right? It is present on the form where the lead is submitted. So we capture what that consumer did, what that consumer saw. But that doesn't mean it was compliant. That doesn't mean that your right disclosure language was presented. That doesn't mean they gave you one-to-one consent. So you have to check, right? And so if you're using TrustedForm Retain, you're retaining certs, and hopefully you're looking at those session replays, checking things, and that's great. But if you want to take it to the next level and really be safe here, you need to be checking for consent before you call. Actually, I do want to see what happened with that poll, but check and make sure before you call you've got consent that's valid. It has your disclosure language that you have approved, and we can manage all the disclosure language variations you want. You can have hundreds of variations. We'll see if it's on your approved list or not. And we can make sure that your advertiser name is present and that the consumer gave consent to you. So that's what's really critical here. That's what TrustedForm Verify is all about. If you're interested in getting a demo, there's a poll in here to ask to see a demo. If you're watching this later, you can just reach out to us, talk to someone in sales, go to our website, activeprospect.com, and we're happy to walk you through it.
Yeah, we've got some great content out there. We're also going to make available to attendees today the slides from our today's webinar that gave you a walkthrough and some visual aids of the new solution. We've also got a one-to-one consent check overview to give you some materials there, some things to consider as you're developing it and building it out. Also got 10 steps to TCPA compliant lead. We've got a checklist provided that's available. We've got a TCPA compliance guide. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the email template. If you need to start with your vendor outreach, don't know where to start, you can grab that language and use that and start the conversation there. And you can, of course, go to activeprospect.com/trustedform/verify if you want to learn more. And great news, we're going to be expanding our FCC webinar series in the near future with some sessions designed, let's say specifically some for advertisers and some designed for lead sellers, so we can go into a bit more detail about the new solution. So stay tuned for that. But thank you all for joining out there. It's a great day here at Active Prospect. We're really excited with the announcement of our launch of TrustedForm Verify's new one-to-one consent check. And thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you guys for all the great questions. Really appreciate it.